important to remember that they were the culmination of months of President Trump repeating over and over again that the American electoral system is a fraud. For 4 years, a man who won 3 states in 2016 by less than a combined total of 78,000 votes that no one questioned at the time has repeatedly questioned the validity of the American electoral process. As recently as September, he would not commit to a peaceful transfer of power, one of the most fundamental hallmarks of American democracy, if he lost the election. Since the election, he's routinely referred to it as a fraud and a fake. After he stoked the flames of outrage for weeks leading up to the events of yesterday, he refused to adequately prepare the U.S. Capitol for the possibility of violence and left it nearly defenseless. His remarks during and after the travesty of the attack on the Capitol were disgraceful. During the violence that sometimes accompanied peaceful protests concerning police brutality last summer, the President was the first to call out local and state officials for not doing enough to protect their residents and demanded that every agitator be arrested and prosecuted. And yesterday, he thanked the mob for their support. The whole thing makes me sick. Yesterday's riot was a dark moment for our country, made even more depressing by the President's role leading up to it and his wholly inadequate and appalling response to the violence. Almost as ridiculous, on the same day, at virtually the same time, a handful of elected officials, egged on by their Republican president, attempted to use fully unconstitutional means to reverse the will of millions of Americans who voted in last year's election. To no one's surprise, their efforts failed, and in the light of yesterday's events, the brazenly political nature of their actions was laid bare for all to see. When I was asked back in September about the President's reluctance to say he would step down if he lost the election, I said at the time that the U.S. electoral system and the thousands of elected and appointed state and local officials who oversee our elections and appoint our electors would do the right thing. And they did. The most powerful office in the free world, when used for an illegitimate purpose, is no match for the democratic process. Congress reconvened last night and did the job millions of Americans empowered them to do. That's because Americans' democratic process and our peaceful transition of power that follows elections, whether we like the results or not, is much more powerful than any one person. I despise much of what our politics, often amplified by social media platforms, has become. Too many people in public life now associate disagreements with character flaws and use that message to engage and enrage their supporters. This has to stop. Disagreements are just that, disagreements. The Lieutenant Governor and I work with our colleagues in the legislature on many issues that are difficult and emotional, where there are many disagreements. But we stick to the issues, we don't name call, and more often than not, we get something done, without the kind of vitriol that constantly spills forth from the halls of Washington. So last night, as I listened to one federal elected official after another stand up and say, in response to yesterday's attack, that they all have a role to play in the tone and tenor of American politics, I felt a little bit of hope. We're still dealing with a deadly pandemic and an underperforming economy that's come with it. People remain justifiably anxious about their day-to-day and their future. And it's long past time for the folks in Washington to turn the page and do what's right for this nation. Let's hope they meant what they said last night. I sure do. Now back to the updates on the COVID-19 pandemic. Yesterday, the Department of Public Health reported 102,000 new tests, bringing the cumulative total to about 11.3 million. 6,419 new cases were reported, bringing the total to over 386,000 cases confirmed since the beginning of the pandemic in Massachusetts. The 7-day average of the positive test rate is 8.25%, and right now there are about 80,000 estimated active cases. There are currently around 2,400 people hospitalized for COVID, and 442 of them are in the ICU. As we all know, Massachusetts is fighting its way through a second surge. Cases are growing, and hospitalizations continue to climb. This trend, as we know, has been going on for weeks, driven in part by people letting their guard down in informal settings and over the holidays. Before Thanksgiving, our 7-day average of new cases was about 2,500 per day. Today, that figure has jumped by 91%, with a 7-day average of new cases at almost 4,800. That puts a lot of pressure on our healthcare system and our hospitals. It's also putting significant pressure on our healthcare workers who continue to do an incredible job on the front lines fighting COVID every day. In the past 6 weeks, COVID hospitalizations have grown by 145%. During that same period of time, ICU admissions due to COVID have grown by about 111%. On Thanksgiving, our hospitals were about 65% occupied. Today, they're 84% occupied. And our ICU census also continues to rise. It was just over 50% at Thanksgiving, and it's now at 75%. The administration and the command center have taken several steps to support our hospital systems and better prepare frontline healthcare workers. We've stood up 2 field hospitals to create more beds, one in Worcester at the DCU Center and a second that launched earlier this week in Lowell. These facilities help ease the burden both by treating seriously ill patients and by taking in lower acuity patients. But as the healthcare system absorbs the magnitude of the impact of the holiday season, they need more relief. Today we're announcing new steps for hospitals to expand ICU capacity through a more flexible model. And effective today, hospitals with certain capacity restraints will have the option to temporarily request an exemption to mandated nurse-to-patient staff ratios in the ICU. The Department of Public Health is also moving hospitals in all regions of the Commonwealth to Tier 4 status in their hospital preparedness plans. Secretary Sarders will talk more about this in detail in a minute. We remain committed to supporting our world-class healthcare system and our incredible healthcare workers. And we believe that these steps, among others, are crucial to ensuring that they can continue to provide the care to all the patients who need it as we battle this pandemic. Now, since December 26, the Commonwealth's had statewide restrictions in place to pause activity and reduce mobility statewide. These restrictions include reduced capacity for nearly all industries and reduced gathering sizes. It was put in place in addition to other existing orders, like the 10 p.m. stay-at-home advisory and early closures for business earlier this fall. Altogether, these restrictions are set to reduce the spread of COVID-19 and lower the strain on our healthcare system while maintaining open businesses and keeping schools open. As we continue to see a strain on our healthcare system and respond to the holiday spike, we're today announcing capacity and gathering limit restrictions will be in place for at least another 2 weeks. They were originally scheduled to expire on January 10th. The new date is January 24th. And as a reminder, capacity limits will remain at 25% for most businesses. Indoor and outdoor gathering limits will remain 25 people outside and 10 people inside, including for events. And over the next 2 weeks, we'll continue to look at and evaluate the data to make further decisions. And we know that extending those restrictions for many businesses, especially small businesses, is a lot to ask. But we need to stay in this game a little longer, especially during this most crucial period, to stop the spread of the virus and build the bridge to vaccines. As a reminder, these capacity restrictions do not apply to K-12 schools. School districts can continue to bring students back to the classroom, as the science shows clearly that schools can and are right now holding in-person class safely, even in communities with high transmission rates. We also launched a new round of grants that are available for small businesses. Through the Massachusetts Growth Capital Corporation, our administration has made $668 million in state funding available for businesses impacted by the pandemic. Over $120 million in grants have already gone out the door for those who previously applied, and applications for the new grant program are now open. To learn more or apply, please visit empowersmallbusiness.org. The Lieutenant Governor will talk more about that in detail in a minute. Before I close, I just want to give a quick update on vaccines. Obviously, battling COVID-19 has been an extraordinary challenge for everybody in Massachusetts and across the country, and indeed around the world. And as we head into 2021, we have good reason to be optimistic that the vaccines that are here and continue to arrive and being administered to thousands upon thousands of residents and workers can and will make a really big difference. As of the end of the day Wednesday, there were 329,000 doses of COVID vaccine that have been shipped to providers in Massachusetts, including both first and second doses. 154,132 doses have been administered and have been reported on the state's MIIS database. In addition to that, about 280 of our 383 nursing homes will have received and had doses administered by either CVS or Walgreens by the end of the day tomorrow. And later today, the Department of Public Health will post the weekly dashboard, which will have a lot more vaccine data available on it. We know these can't be administered fast enough, and the Command Center and DPH are working around the clock with our federal and local partners to inoculate residents and staff as quickly and as safely as possible. Millions of doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers, as well as long-term care residents and staff, are lining up to receive the vaccines. And we really hope that these folks share their experiences with their patients and with others to demonstrate why vaccines are safe and effective. Vaccines will soon begin the next phase, which starts with first responders on Monday, January 11th. First responders can visit mass.gov/firstrespondervaccine to learn more on scheduling an appointment or organizing vaccines for their departments. And while they get cranking, we must all hang in there a little longer and do the things we know work to prevent the spread. Wear a mask, avoid groups, don't let your guard down in informal settings, socially distance, and recognize and understand that prevention, done right every day, is an enormously effective tool in slowing the spread. I want to thank again the people in Massachusetts for doing their parts. We've always been profoundly impressed and grateful for the grit and resiliency of the people of the Commonwealth during this crisis. With that, I'll turn it over to the Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Governor. What unfolded yesterday, incited by the President, as well as a number of Republican senators and congressmen, was a disgrace. It was horrifying to me, to Governor Baker, and Americans nationwide. President Trump's tepid response and failure to condemn the actions of his supporters was shocking, as well as we all watched our Capitol be attacked with members of Congress and innocent civilians inside. This is not who we are. Yet through all the chaos and mayhem, our democratic process prevailed, and Congress returned to the chambers to properly certify the results of this election. Unfortunately, this chaos is the product of so many attacks on our electoral system. Everyone must now put aside party and politics and embrace a peaceful transition of power in order to come together and remember the values that have made America what it is. And in Massachusetts, we remain focused on the pandemic that has firmly gripped our communities and the people who call Massachusetts home. And as the governor said, today we are announcing that the statewide restrictions that have been in effect since December 26th will remain in place for an additional 2 weeks. Our goal remains to keep these restrictions temporary. Capacity limits will remain at 25% for most industries, and I'll list them. They include restaurants and personal services, theaters and performance venues, casinos and office spaces, places of worship, retail, driving and flight schools, golf facilities for indoor spaces, libraries, lodging for common areas, arcades and indoor recreation businesses, fitness centers and health clubs, museums, cultural facilities, and guided tours. All other rules and restrictions and each sector-specific guidance will remain in effect. Like we've said before, these are incredibly difficult decisions, but they are necessary in order to slow down activity and reduce mobility so we can reduce the spread of COVID and keep our schools open and our economy running. Protecting the public health of our residents and ensuring our hospitals are able to care for those in need has been difficult for everyone, including our businesses. We know that local and small businesses have experienced tremendous loss and are still faced with uncertainty about their future. That's why we announced a $774 million comprehensive economic recovery plan with a $50.8 million small business grant program administered by Mass Growth Capital Corp., and then created a $668 million small business relief fund administered by MGCC to distribute these funds. We were grateful and thankful to our colleagues in the legislature for expanding this program with $50.8 million to help our small businesses. And over the last few weeks, we've been able to award around $117 million to almost 2,500 businesses across our Commonwealth. Each grant is aimed at helping Massachusetts businesses literally keep the lights on, make their payroll, and get through these tough winter months. We look forward to announcing additional awards over the coming weeks at MGCC, and they will continue to review these applications to make sure these dollars get into the hands of business owners and operators across our Commonwealth. If you are a small business owner who has not yet applied to the new sector-specific relief grant program, please visit www.empoweringsmallbusiness.org for more details. And a reminder that this grant window closes on January 15th. So please, if you have not applied as a small business owner, get your application in. The economic and public health challenges that our Commonwealth has had to weather are still very much with us, and we will continue to face them together. We look forward to continuing to support small businesses in every corner on main streets and downtowns of the communities of our Commonwealth as we turn what we hope is the final corner of this fight against COVID-19. It is important that we hang on for just a little longer and heed the words of our governor to do your part. Everyone has a role to play, everyone. We thank you for your hard work at home in your workplaces, and in your communities. Please keep it up. And now I'd like to turn it over to Secretary Keneally.
Thank you, Governor and Lieutenant Governor. I join with you in denouncing the actions of those in Washington who engaged in violence and vandalism. Yesterday was a dark day in our American history, a history with so many roots here in Massachusetts. Those responsible should be prosecuted, and those who incited them should be held to account. Last spring, we put great thought and care into the development of our reopening plan, which includes protocols to protect everyone's health and safety to the extent possible. The extension today of the restrictions announced a couple weeks ago is consistent with our process of following data, a process by which we've operated since announcing Phase 1 of reopening back in May. As the Lieutenant Governor pointed out, we continue to move funds out to businesses that have been severely impacted by the pandemic, and that will continue. We have also implemented several other programs that are part of our comprehensive economic recovery plan announced in October. Just yesterday, we announced nearly $10 million in grants to 183 nonprofit cultural organizations to support their recovery. Of those organizations receiving funding through the Cultural Organization Economic Recovery Grant Program, 46 recipients reported that they have not received any federal COVID assistance to date. On Tuesday, we were in Springfield to announce 3 new programs to boost internet connectivity statewide, including a subsidy program to assist job seekers in the mass hire system that are facing a technology barrier. Last week, MassDOT announced the awarding of more than $3 million in the second round of funding of the Shared Winter Streets and Spaces program. The awards support 17 projects in 15 municipalities, funding lighting and spaces for outdoor commerce, new and safer facilities for bicyclists and pedestrians, connections to schools and senior centers, and new bus facilities in Boston, Brockton, Lynn, and Somerville. And just before Christmas, more than $1.2 million in grants were awarded to collaborative workspaces for new equipment or building improvements, including adjustments to help those spaces adhere to social distancing and health and safety standards. We know that the sacrifices of our business owners have been many, and the challenges are far from over. We thank you for your patience and for your commitment to your customers, your employees, and to public safety. Support will continue to come from our administration, and we will continue to work with our federal partners to get the new resources approved by Congress here to Massachusetts and to the people and enterprises that need the most. And now I'd like to turn it over to Secretary Sudders.
Governor, Lieutenant Governor, Secretary Keneally, good afternoon. I will not add anything more to the despicable assault on the Capitol and our democracy, but share the sentiments expressed by the Governor today. I want to provide some additional information on our hospital capacity, our nurse staffing ratios, and updated PPE guidance. As the Governor indicated, our hospital capacity limits are being stretched to their limit. Our hospitalizations, as you've heard, have more than doubled since just before Thanksgiving. Earlier today, we've designated our statewide hospital capacity to the highest level of concern, Tier 4, defined as active and ongoing constraint warranting intervention. Our 7-day available hospital capacity average is below the established threshold of 20% across the state. Using a regional coordination system, every hospital gathers at least daily with their colleagues to address capacity constraints and continue to load balance. Capacity issues are escalated that cannot be managed locally for support from other regions or statewide. Our frontline healthcare workers are once again being called upon to step up to manage through this difficult period. Direct care staff are being reassigned from their regular shifts and units to help care for individuals with COVID-19 and others. Hospitals are managing by daily patient load balancing, transferring patients within their system or to other hospitals where capacity exists, as well as to our field hospitals. Hospitals may transfer patients once they are triaged and stabilized, even when a patient declines a transfer. If you're a patient receiving emergency care at a hospital and you need to be hospitalized, one of 3 actions may occur once you're stabilized and triaged. You may be cared for at that hospital for the duration of your inpatient stay. If COVID positive, you may be transferred to a specialized, fully staffed COVID-19 field hospital in either Lowell or Worcester. Or if not a COVID-related illness, you may be transferred to another hospital, preferably within the region. Different than in the spring, we're not closing outpatient services, including pediatric appointments, preventive services, and the like. However, hospitals must cease all non-essential elective invasive procedures, such as orthopedic procedures and dermatology. At the same time the state is escalating all hospitals to Tier 4, the state is also providing hospitals with the most severe capacity constraints. Flexibility to deploy nursing staff in order to expand inpatient bed capacity as patient demand warrants. Effective today, hospitals with severe capacity constraints may temporarily request an exemption to the state's mandated ICU nurse-to-patient ratios. Unlike in the spring, this is not an across-the-board exemption. It's hospital or hospital system specific. A hospital system may exercise this exemption only if they have capacity of less than 20% across their system for more than 7 days, and the chief executive officer has attested in writing that all non-essential elective invasive procedures have ceased. This includes canceling all of their elective procedures conducted in their outpatient setting if it's under the hospital's license. When a hospital or hospital system is experiencing severe capacity constraints, we expect them to cancel electives and to redeploy as many staff as possible to care for patients with COVID. Canceling electives, redeploying staff to care for COVID patients, and suspending the ICU nurse-to-patient ratios was essential during the spring surge for hospitals to optimize capacity. Hospitals must take every reasonable step to expand capacity prior to requesting this temporary exemption. We remain committed to continuing to provide all essential health care services to residents throughout the Commonwealth, while simultaneously supporting hospitals in the coming weeks ahead as COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations continue to increase. In the early days of the pandemic, as all of you know, the global supply chain struggled to deliver critical PPE. Massachusetts pursued every possible opportunity and avenue, and every piece of this important protective measure, and partnered with local manufacturers and others who pivoted operations to support essential workers in a time of need. Since then, the Commonwealth has added millions of pieces of PPE to the state stockpile over the last several months, with sufficient materials to support medical institutions if their supplies ran low throughout 2021. In addition to masks, gowns, gloves, and other PPE, the stockpile includes approximately 1,200 ventilators, almost double the number on hand in the spring. The Department of Public Health has issued updated comprehensive guidance to clarify the PPE that healthcare personnel use in the clinical care areas. The guidance makes clear that the best practice regarding the use of N95 respirators and alternatives for healthcare personnel caring for individuals presumed or confirmed to be infected with COVID-19. Due to the improvement in the healthcare supply chain of face masks, DPH has modified earlier guidance and supports the extended use of face masks for no more than 1 shift or 1 day under the following conditions. The guidance recommends that an N95 filtering face piece respirator or higher, as well as eye protection, isolation gown, and gloves be used when caring for an individual who is presumed or confirmed to be infected with COVID-19. The guidance clarifies that the use of an N95 respirator when caring for patients with COVID-19 should be limited to 1 shift or 1 day. Respirators that have been reprocessed and decontaminated may be reused as long as their structural integrity is maintained. We will work through this together. I'm grateful to all the nurses and all the direct care staff in our hospitals who continue to work side by side with their patients to get through this pandemic. With that, I'll turn it back to the governor.
Questions?
Governor, do you think the president should be removed from office?
I think that the most important thing we need to do at this point in time is recognize that there's a transition to a new administration that's going to take place 14 days from now, and that Vice President Pence should be empowered to be able to do that. Whatever the mechanism is for doing that, I leave up to the people in Washington. But I think it's important at this point that there be an orderly transition and that that transition be led by the Vice President.
The 25th Amendment or impeachment?
I think people should pursue, it's 14 days, okay? I think people should pursue whatever they believe will make it possible in the most expeditious way possible for the President to step down and the Vice President to assume the office, the powers of the office for the next 14 days so that an orderly transition can take place.
Governor, there's now a report that Mayor Walsh was asked to be Labor Secretary. Have you been briefed yet, or have you had a chance to talk to him here?
I talk to Mayor Walsh almost every day about one thing or another. I have not talked to him today, and I have not talked to him about the labor position in Washington.
Governor, does the chaos at the Capitol make you regret your...
Are there any concerns regarding activity at the State House, or is there ramped up security to make up for this, or what's the response here locally?
Yeah, I mean, we've had regular conversations with our colleagues in the public safety community at the federal, state, and local level, as well as sort of, very regular conversations with our colleagues in municipal government ever since the first round of demonstrations began back in May, and that's never stopped. So there's a constant ongoing dialogue about, what's happening around the Commonwealth. And that also includes conversations about what's going on around this building. And we certainly will continue to maintain what I would describe as a high degree of vigilance about ensuring that the people of Massachusetts are protected throughout this period of time. I'm not going to get into the details on this because the details of these kinds of conversations and decisions ought not to be shared, in my opinion, publicly. But I can tell you that there is an ongoing dialogue that goes on between our administration, the folks in public safety, the federal folks in public safety, and our colleagues in local government about what's up and what's going on and what we all need to do to make sure that we preserve and protect our citizenry, period.
Does the chaos at the Capitol make you regret your decision not to vote in this last presidential election, what some say was basically a no preference?
I made the decision that basically said I wasn't particularly pleased with either choice, and I was perfectly comfortable with that. And a lot of other people told me that was a pretty good move as far as they were concerned because they felt the same way.
What did you think of Vice President Biden's comments yesterday? Did they set the right tone? Were you happy with what you heard?
I thought Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden, did you call him Vice President? Yeah. I thought President-elect Biden's comments yesterday were exactly the kind of tone that we need at this point in time. And as I said in my remarks, I thought the comments last night, one speaker after another, Democrat and Republican, who spoke during the reconvening of the special session to certify the presidential election vote, was also reassuring. But all those folks have work to do. And as I also said in my remarks, we still have a pandemic. We still have an underperforming economy. We still have a lot of issues that are of deep concern to the people of this country that those folks need to work together on to move this country forward. And I really hope that they meant what they said last night and that message about tone and tenor and the importance of actually accomplishing things together is a big part of how they actually perform, come January 21st.
Governor, what were you doing during the uprising yesterday? Were you
Yeah. No, we had a couple of conversations with our colleagues in local government and our colleagues in law enforcement. We also talked to some of the folks in this building, senators, state reps, and made sure that the conversation about the security of this building was something that we were discussing with our colleagues here as well. No, there were no known threats here in the Commonwealth, no known threats associated with this building or any other public building.
Governor, can you talk about the biggest concerns for the hospital capacity, and can you give us an update on the decisions of the field hospitals? Will that change?
So the field hospitals have the ability to flex. I think the one in Worcester can go as high as 150, 125 beds. Which one is it? How many beds can the one in Worcester go to? They can go to 150. Lowell can go to 75? Yeah. So, I mean, we have capacity. And the other thing I would say is that we should all remember that our hospitals and our healthcare system generally are working really hard to make sure that they work on not just COVID-related issues, but that they also continue to work on emergency healthcare issues that people have as they customarily do. I would also point out that in the spring, the ultimate COVID census got north of 4,000. The census at this point is about 2,400. Now, we know we are in the midst of a surge associated with the holidays and expect and anticipate that that surge is going to carry forward here for a while, which is why we think it's important to make sure that the hospitals have the flexibility that they need to be able to continue to serve all the people, not just the COVID folks, but other folks who have emergency issues during this time. And as we also said, the outpatient stuff continues to be available on a daily basis.
Are we starting to see the Christmas bump now that was 2 weeks from tomorrow is 2 weeks from Christmas?
I think the answer, I would say that the Christmas bump is certainly upon us. But I would also say that that whole week between Christmas and New Year's with the weekend in between and all the rest makes the Thanksgiving is literally like 2 or 3 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. The Christmas thing, I think we all think of as a holiday period that lasts a little longer than just a day or two. So I think we're expecting that the Christmas bump will probably roll out a little longer than maybe the Thanksgiving one did. And again, a lot of this depends, and I've said this before, to what people actually did over that period of time. I mean, it's very clear that over the Thanksgiving holiday, a lot of people got together with a lot of people in informal settings, and we saw that literally 7 days after Thanksgiving. Boom, there was almost a doubling in our basic caseload on a daily basis associated with the number of positive cases that we saw, which then translated both into an increase in the number of hospitalization we saw, but also a significant increase in the average age of the people being hospitalized. You know, we've talked before about the fact that at the beginning of November, the average age of the person who got hospitalized in Massachusetts was around 61, and a few weeks after Thanksgiving, it was 73. Big difference.
Governor, they now apparently talked about Mayor Walsh possibly becoming labor secretary. There's now confirmation that he's been selected.
Okay, so the first thing I would say is what I always say about anybody in public life, which is every and any decision that they make is a personal decision, and it's up to them to make whatever decision they think is in their best interest and the best interest of their family. And I would say the same here. We obviously have had, for the past 6 years now, a really positive, collaborative working relationship with Mayor Walsh and his team. On many, many issues, our ability to work together has made a big difference for the city and the surrounding environs, and I consider him somebody who I can be very straight with on pretty much anything we talk about. If he does take this job, obviously we'll wish him well and do everything we can to make sure that in the midst of this difficult time, that we transition, effectively and quickly and collaboratively to whomever his successor would be, which I'm assuming under the city charter is probably the president of the city council. Is that right?
Yeah.
I think that's right, is it? Is that right? Okay.
Last question. Governor, I wanted to ask you about the vaccine dashboard. Are you just tracking right now people who decline the vaccine and also the vaccines that are wasted? And if not, is there any plans to do that and to include it in the vaccine dashboard?
Well, it's pretty hard to define how you would define somebody who declines a vaccine because, remember, this vaccine comes in on a rolling basis. So if you work for a healthcare institution, for example, you're going to have many opportunities as that stuff rolls through your institution to either choose to accept it or not. I think at this point, the hospital community continues to set up regular opportunities for their employees to get vaccinated. Many have taken advantage of it, many have signed up, and many remain in what I would call sort of the to-do category. But I don't think it's possible to sort of officially designate somebody as a yes or a no, because people do have more than one chance to sign up. So I'm not really sure how you would collect that kind of data. I mean, if you were to ask me once this thing starts to roll out, people are going to have opportunities at any time, at some point, to choose to get vaccinated or not. And they'll continue to have that opportunity. So whether somebody chooses to be a first mover or a fast follower or somebody who waits a little bit before they choose to get vaccinated just to see what happens to everybody else, I don't really think this is kind of an on-off, I chose to, I chose not to. It'll be much harder to figure out how to answer that question, because once you are part of the universe that is eligible, it's not like you stop being part of the universe that's eligible. You'll continue to be part of the university or the universe that's eligible to get the vaccine. What was the second part of that question?
I was asking about wasted vaccine.
Do you have any information on that? The only one I'm familiar with is Brockton Community Health Center, which had a bunch of appointments scheduled. Some people didn't show up. And what they've done, which I think was the right answer, is they now have the ability to designate certain people who qualify under the current enrollment criteria who will get vaccinated if, in fact, people who were supposed to show up and access the vaccine by appointment don't come. And then they'll just vaccinate those people instead.
Are you still planning to wait until it's your turn in line to get your vaccine?
Yeah, the Lieutenant Governor and I have no interest in cutting any lines here. There's...
If you have the opportunity, to present it to you?
Look, I think if we wanted to do it, we could probably do it, but we're not going to, so it doesn't really matter. The idea that we would get vaccinated before long-term care workers or long-term care residents or hospital workers or people over the age of 75 or folks with multiple comorbidities or folks in senior housing or assisted living, or home health care workers. There's like no reason that I can come up with that would justify us going before we were actually eligible. So that's not going to happen.
The contract's been signed with Gillette or Fenway or any of those places yet? Can you announce?
We don't have any contract announcements like that to make at this time, but we've obviously been talking to a lot of different folks about as the size of the universe that gets vaccinated grows, where we might choose to locate some of the sites for more what I would call sort of mass vaccination type activities.
Are you citing the jobs or transportation bond bill? I know you thanked the lawmakers yesterday for, staying up as late as they could, so I was wondering if you made any decisions on those bills.
They're pretty big. What I would say is that we have a lot of stuff on our desk, and we're going through it, and we'll be back here to talk to you folks about it over the course of the next, what at this point would be 8 or 9 days, right? Thank you.
I have one question about college payroll. We've been looking at state college payroll for 2020. I know it's not within your scope to say how much and ask the state for money, is there any mechanism in which you can, ask them to maybe bring some of those salaries in, and is that something that you would do?
Well, keep in mind that I'm not exactly how, off the top of my head, I don't remember how this works for every piece of the public higher ed system. But some folks get their tuition directly, and it doesn't get processed through the traditional governor proposes, legislature disposes appropriation process. And so in some ways, we certainly subsidize and support public higher ed in a pretty big way here in Massachusetts. And there are significant resources for public higher ed that are tied to the last stimulus bill that Congress passed, and we're sort of still waiting for guidance on that. It might be possible for us to provide a variety of guidance with respect to how state resources could be spent. But the thing to remember here is for years and years, the message was always, and pretty well delivered by a lot of different people, that the legislature and the governor putting very particular constraints on how universities and state colleges could spend resources, especially in times like this, makes it difficult for them to make, quote, good decisions on behalf of the people that they serve. I'm not familiar with the issue that you're raising, but obviously we'll certainly take a look at that as we go through the process of developing our budget. But there were reasons why people changed some of the rules and some of the constraints that used to exist when it came to public higher ed. And those decisions were voted on by, the legislature and supported by our predecessors. Thanks.
Guys.
Thank you.